Series 6, it's got to be some of the funniest scenes and episodes that we've ever done, I'd say.
Step up to red alert.
Sir, are you absolutely sure? It does mean changing the bulb.
It had the whole experience of doing the pilot in the States. Maybe that had an influence.
Is everything okay, sir?
No, it's not. Some smackers filled in this "Have you got a good memory" quiz.
But that was you, sir, last week, don't you remember?
Was it?
Look, nobody else spells Thursday with an F.
Series 6 came in. The scripts were subtitled Series 6, The Starbuggers.
Well, the cast was different because we no longer had Holly. We'd lost Red Dwarf.
Now, gentlemen, as we are all aware, we have lost Red Dwarf.
Losing Red Dwarf, in a sense, was going to open things out a bit more. The chase of Red Dwarf, the search for Red Dwarf, if you like, was going to be exciting, you know.
Should we look at you, Doug, when we turn? If we look at you.
Yeah, everyone try and get an eye line on Doug.
We liked the idea of just keeping everything contained.
The Starbuggers set was kind of, which has always been like a little tack-on, add-on thing that we broke fairly early on, was now quite a big, substantial set with a lot more detail in it, and that was where most of the action took place.
We had a smaller set to deal with. It was also visually a better set. This at least enabled us to build more new sets in the space that we would normally have used for Red Dwarf.
How much of that decision was based on the fact that we'd blown everything up from the stock sets of Red Dwarf from Series 5? I don't know.
We had spoken about, oh, it'd be great to direct. Then it became obvious that we were behind with the scripts, and so we couldn't. And then Andy came in, and I have to say, Andy did a terrific job.
Andy was just like, you know, first day, he was just sort of blended straight away.
Take a bit of time to compose yourself, then pick up the guns. I was looking at Spitting Image in the puppet making side and directing that, and through that knew Rob and Doug vaguely. Knew someone was working on it at that stage, Gilly Archer, and had been a fan, and then heard that Ed wasn't doing Series 6, so immediately shot in there with the CV and tape and banging on the door.
Andy was good. Andy was good. Sort of Dutch South African.
We all assumed he was South African, and we used to tease him because of his name. This is still during the period of apartheid, so it wasn't a popular thing to be a white South African with two black actors. So I was always going, "Andy, how are you this morning? It is great to see you," which used to upset Craig. He thought he always found my South African accent worryingly convincing.
It's not a great comedy pedigree, is it?
It was just gold for the guys making jokes about it. But although I think, well, I'm sure Andy had no South African connection whatsoever, but it was just something that they milked for all they were worth.
Put a lot of extra charges on the front where the Keffers are sitting. That's right, right east to the back of the bus. But not too much explosive around the white boys.
You know, he did things calmly, his way, and obviously liaised with Doug and Rob, of course.
No matter how wrong it went, which it did, he somehow didn't go, "Oh, how do I sort this out?" He went, "Right." You know, it was like almost that was a good thing when it went wrong, because then he could sort it out. So he had enormous enthusiasm. So he kept us going when we were flagging really, really well. He was very focused and very clear about what we were doing.
He managed to sort of do what Juliet couldn't do in a way, because, well, what Juliet didn't do, and that's what he became sort of part of the posse very quickly.
I think the key thing is not to screw it up, really. I mean, there are rhythms and patterns within that. You've got to make sure you're cutting within that rhythm and getting them to perform within that rhythm.
He also had a different way of dealing with the cast. He was very gentle and very clever.
There's not many options when it comes to the script of Red Dwarf as how it's going to go. It goes one way, and that's the writer's way, which, you know, everybody has to sort of join.
Haven't you got anything better than this hogwash? We're used to the best.
Justin he just made me laugh, really.
Well, I would have to admit that before I came to Red Dwarf, I wasn't a huge sci-fi fan. So it's presented, the first challenge for me was to actually bone up on my sci-fi folklore, and to be able to go into the production meetings and script meetings actually conversant with what they were talking about.
Since you're traveling through compressed space, time will move more swiftly for the object passing through the wormhole. 1 minute on this side of the wormhole will represent many years on the other.
They'd all worked together for 5 previous seasons, so they all knew each other very well. And a lot of the character interplay on the screen was borrowed, shall we say, from the character interplay between the actors.
I think with any long-running show, that line between the actor and the character becomes blurred, and they merge together. And certainly within Red Dwarf, it was very hard to say. I think the writers were stealing dialogue off the actors' own mouths, and they were slipping into their characters, and the elements merged together.
For example, the morale meeting that kicks off out of time broadly reflected a meeting that we'd had earlier in the series to try and resolve one or two of the differences of opinion that had arisen in the course of filming one or two of the episodes.
I thought it would be productive if we all met once a week to have a coffee or a beer, whatever's your poison. And get any problems we may have off our chests. Any objections?
No, sounds like a very good idea, sir. Excellent.
Well, as it's week 1, why don't I start? You know what it is about Lister that really makes me want to puke?
There wasn't a lot of downtime when we were doing it. I mean, it was a very condensed production period, and it was very tight. The whole thing was done very quick. We didn't have time to muck about.
I felt it was important to have a change. Then you really felt that the series was moving on. So this is where Lister got his sort of boiler suit, but more of a utility look for him. Crichton we completely redid this time. I think basically because he moaned so much. No, it was, I mean, we had to rebuild. It had to have so much more flexibility.
I think it was the kind of groinal area. It was where most of the redesigning took place, which it did mean that I could sit down. I don't think it was comfortable that I could sit down, but I could sit down without it bursting apart and flying across the set. And that does make a difference. It is an odd thing when you can't sit down in something, and then it takes 10 minutes to get it off. So you stand up, and then after 5 hours, you realise you've been standing up for 5 hours, and generally you don't. You generally do sit down at some point, even if you've got a standy-up type job.
We put him in a much lighter, much more easily movable costume that just had one bit that could just be put on really quickly and taken off really quickly.
They'd got the Velcro right, so that when if I moved one arm, it didn't and pop open. But there were still quite a lot of bolts and screws holding it together.
What a senseless waste!
I had flashing lights on my shoulders that actually went dip, 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 which were really good. And then I expect Craig touched them, or looked at them from a distance, and then they never worked again, no matter how many electricians tried to rewire them.
Again?
If I ever had to sort of choose one of my least favourite Red Dwarf outfits, I'm afraid the padding would get it. Lovely job, though, Howard.
Oh, I think he went for this sort of quilted jacket.
The padding, I just thought looked a bit like padding, sort of a quilted kind of padding type outfit.
It was the same fabric, but it was just applied in a different way, and it just lit very well. It looked good on camera.
Crichton, you're forgetting about Space Corps Directive 1742. May I remind you of Space Corps Directive 34124, Article number 39436175880932-B.
Well, I thought it was a great idea for running gag, actually. Because you knew it's one of those things where the audience eventually knew, Space Corps Directive. You knew there was a big gag coming from Crichton eventually. I think you're thinking of Space Corps Directive, and he would go on. And the numbers were generally not a difficult thing, so you could sort of make them up.
That's it. I'm invoking Space Corps Directive 68250.
68250? But sir, surely that's impossible without at least one live chicken and a rabbi.
The first series I did, in Series 3, I was still a smoker. Then I stopped for the 90s. I didn't smoke in the 90s. So I remember that whole thing of Craig asking me for cigarettes, because when he first met me, I'd had cigarettes. And then by then, like 4 years later, when I hadn't ever had any cigarettes, he'd always be, "Hey, Bobby, you got a cigarette? Get a cigarette." "Sorry, Craig, I don't have any." No. So, and that had gone on for a long time. So he decided, I think he'd been in America or somewhere just before. So he came in on the first day with his duty frees, and he gave sort of everyone who smoked like 5 packets, so that for the rest of the series, he could hassle them for a cigarette when he'd run out. And they were buried all over the set, everywhere. You'd walk past someone and you'd just look around the corner and there was sort of 5 packets of cigarettes there, resting, and 2 lighters. He'd just stashed them everywhere, so he'd never be that on the no smoking set. Everywhere there was no smoking signs, usually with Craig leaning against it. Safety Nazis, man.
Well, we worked with a company called SVC, and I think it was just at the beginning of that period when there'd been a step change in the computing and processing power of graphics generators, and we were able to take the benefit of that, and we had some very creative people who were very keen on the show, who wanted to actually come in and came to us with lots of ideas about stuff that we could do.
They were showing us adverts to say, oh, look, this is the effect you can do, that effect you can do.
I mean, they did do above and beyond the call. I think they were enthusiastic for the project as well.
Sitcoms generally don't use state-of-the-art sort of video techniques to blow characters in half or have wibbly-wobbly light effects, which at the time were cutting edge. I mean, now you can do them on a laptop at home, but at the time they were kind of, wow, you can actually put a fizzly thing that goes down there.
I always loved Lister waking up with the nails.
Oh no, the long hair and the fingernails. I love that. I love that look. Actually, if I could grow my hair like that, I'd have it like that. I felt like I should be in a heavy metal band, more of a blues country band, you know, from Louisiana. And that walk. But I mean, everyone thought I was putting a funny walk on. I wasn't. I was just trying not to snap the nails.
And that was a great reintroduction. Out of stasis. You know, here they are.
I think it was just a basic restatement of the situation.
I just felt it gave you a start to Series 6, which was very useful, rather than coming straight off the end of Series 5 and on we go again. And they wanted to make changes, so it was a nice, clean break.
Sirens, from an effects point of view, was an absolute godsend. It's got an asteroid sequence, which I think even in the script sort of said as close to The Empire Strikes Back as we can get. It had the Scouter, it had crashed spacecraft, it had monsters. It had absolutely everything you could possibly want from an episode of Red Dwarf.
I think what's obvious about Sirens is that Rob and Doug had been at the Big Book of Myths for inspiration, and had a lot of the storylines within Series 6 do have a mythical underpinning.
They're called sirens, like with Ulysses and that ancient Turkish legend. I believe the legend was Greek, sir. Whatever, some country big on curly shoes and humus. I got kissed by that girl who went on to be in the bill for years, Samantha Robson. She was blonde at the time, Pete Trance's sister.
I mean, it was that whole page 3 pin-up as far as we could go within the realms of decency.
But they made me pay for it. 1 minute I'm kissing a beautiful blonde, and the next minute it's a spermicidal fluid-dripping dung beetle.
It's agricultural KY jelly, because you can get that in big buckets. It's what vets use when they're inspecting pregnant cows.
It was horrible. It was horrible.
I'm sure it's not second-hand. I'm sure it's new. It's not that they're not using the old stuff. It's a freshly opened, but they always show us they break the seal. And then, because you can just get kind of bucketfuls of it.
That's because I kicked off so much about Rimmer getting laid in hollow ship.
I think there's a great cliche amongst romantic films and romantic comedies of the swirling circular camera shots. I just want to play with that, really. And decided that in his head it was a great romantic moment, the beautiful woman coming onto him, finally getting to kiss her, to be revealed in the spin as a big monster.
They make you pay for these things, you know. What they give with one hand, they taketh away with the other.
Andy Diemene went very heavily for a sketch that I'd done of a sort of stag beetle design, partly because he liked the crouched stag beetle sort of carapace look, but also I designed it with gloss black eyes, which Andy sort of said gave it a villain wearing dark sunglasses look. It's a real Terminator villain.
I remember we filmed in a quarry somewhere in Kent. I haven't a clue where it was. It was freezing. She nearly died of hypothermia. She had so many volunteers to wrap her in warm coats, and I think it was mainly Craig, actually.
It was very amusing standing in the middle of this pit where there were lorries driving around, and we're trying to do this scene, which was to any observer would have looked completely mad.
We always end up in the same gravel pit just off the M25 at night, in the rain.
Professor Mamet, my creator.
Hello, Crichton.
Jenny Agutter was fantastic. She was, I mean, it was only one day's filming, a location day's shoot, but she was really good.
We'd also, I think, tried to get Kylie Minogue, who was in one of her lulls in her career, to play one part, but she declined.
You know, and it's when you meet someone like that you know, I watched The Railway Children when I was a kid, and you think, she's proper, you know, she's really proper. She was so excited to be in Red Dwarf. She was really thrilled.
I think I saw Walkabout at a very formative period in my youth, and she always stuck there as an icon, really.
She was so nice and so lovely, and we put her in. She was in a medical uniform of sorts, and I remember it was very short, and she was in big silver boots, and Rob and Doug were extremely happy.
We were filming at that point in the Bankside Power Station, which was it's now the Tate Modern, and we were one of the last film crews to film in there before the wreckers moved in and started the conversion work.
It was a crazy day where I had to be crushed in a compactor and walk along in a square box costume. That was always those really cruel days when, you know, Rob or Doug would walk up and go, you know how uncomfortable your normal costume is? It's nothing in comparison with this. Get in that box.
I'm almost annoyed.
Walking along, you know, with rubber boots with that sort of grippy sole, walking along a grilled metal floor so that they don't go slidey, they go catchy, trippy, in a cardboard box with your face sticking through the front so you can't put your hands up. And what do you do the first 2 seconds you're in it? You go, ah!
If you can play guitar to a reasonable standard, it's not that easy to play badly, you know.
Play the guitar.
What? Here? Inside?
Originally, for the arms of the guitar, we approached Brian May, but I think he wasn't available. And although he wanted to do it, but he just wasn't available. And then because of that, we heard that Anita Dobson was, you know, available. And, you know, she liked the show and wanted to play a part if there was a part available. And in the end, we got Phil Manzanera from Roxy Music to be Lister's arms.
But Phil was great, and we looked at that the other week. Actually, you can't tell, can you? You really can't tell.
Play it.
It's so well done, and he's just round the back of me. I'm like that. He's round the back with his hands through, and it looks... Can't see the joints. I couldn't have done it like that, though. I mean, I can chuck out a few power chords, but, like, no, this guy's you know, he was in Roxy Music. You know, he's been playing guitar for 40 years. I just like the idea, though, that in my head, in Lister's head, he sounds like Phil. See, what's the difference?
I did sort of 10 series of Spitting Image before this, and so we've done a lot of effects and splits and various sort of cheats. And it's always very frustrating that down the middle, the characters have to stand on one side or the other. We had a huge truck full of technology for the shoot, and in the end we used a Fisher-Price video painter, which was a tiny little plastic pen that allowed you to draw on the screen and colour one side or the other with the image. So it did a split, but an organic split. You know, to draw round people over shapes and non-straight line splits. We did tie ourselves in knots at times. It's a 5-camera shoot, and you'd lock off several cameras for different split screens. Actors would go off for makeup, and you'd realise you needed to move another camera, draft another camera in to cover that shot, and it all became very complicated, but we got through.
You'd better have a mighty damn fine explanation for what you've just done, Miladio.
I merely converted your projection unit from soft light to hard light.
Hard light?
Masterstroke on Rob and Doug's part, to be honest. Hard and soft light. It's great.
It was a relief to be able to, you know, touch chopsticks and all that carry on.
I remember him saying he was pleased about it at the time. I think he thought, you know, it was nice for once for him to be normal.
We just wanted to give Rimmer the opportunity to be able to be like a regular character, to see what would happen.
And it then meant he could do anything, touch anything. You didn't have to work your way around that. If there was something that needed to be held or passed over or opened or done, he could be involved then. So it liberated a lot, I think.
We've gone from green to red to now the blue. It was the simplest way of denoting that he was that he had a hard, his light beat had changed. Let's just put him in a different colour.
Suddenly he had to think about his props, which he hadn't had to for any other episode. So there was that side of it. But on the other hand, it did make things a lot easier for us because we didn't spend the whole time going, don't go near that, don't touch that, don't do that.
Of course, it was an invitation for errors, you know, because people would say, how come Rimmer touched the bottom of his shoe when the staircase when he came, you know, that nonsense, you know. All right, then, all that bollocks.
Antimatter chopsticks. We use them all the time.
Antimatter pedals, you know, and they was going. It was just all of us sitting there. What are we doing?
Yeah, that was just mad episode, actually.
Yes, I can remember it was a scene that did require patience.
It was the resetting that was such a nightmare.
We had little battery-operated chopsticks that turned around, but they were made beforehand. We had various objects that flew around, which were just on wires.
We had to somehow navigate the food into people's mouths.
It was continuity hell, really.
And if you look at Legion, what's he doing?
Some of them worked for the first few minutes and then they all fell to bits, and especially Craig's went flying off. But no, they actually managed to glue them back enough for us to do the scene.
That was kind of bizarre. I got to the point where I was sitting there thinking, is this funny? I was really literally, I was saying, is this funny?
Rimmer gets covered in a lot of goo, really, and we just did a separate shot of that. So ran the sequence whole and then did a separate pop of him and basically threw food at him, you know. The other cast were paying for the option.
It's always a big help for physical comedy to have some sort of dance or, you know, sort of sport background. And that, you know, being punched and flying back onto the table, you know, you can't think about it, you know. Once you decide to do it, you just got to go for it. And I think that's where Red Dwarf was another, you know, people never complained about, you know, having to get knocked out or hit with things. People always getting hit. You know, the prop was meant to be, it won't hurt, it won't hurt. Peter Ragg would say it won't hurt, and of course people get hit with props. Ow! So, you know, at least mine was self-inflicted. I only had to throw myself on the table. If Pete had to throw me on there, maybe not.
Do what you gotta, but don't mess up my hair. Thank you.
That whole scene, I love doing that whole scene when I had to knock everybody out. You know, Crichton has to knock all the rest of the cast out, and particularly knocking out Chris with these special bottles that don't hurt when you whack them over people's heads. They do hurt, Chris told me. He did have real bruises. It did show.
There is a cyber park in the complex. You may go to any time period of your choosing and indulge any fantasy you wish with any persons you desire.
His costume was possibly one of the less flattering costumes in the history of Red Dwarf.
Bizarre's the word that comes to mind.
Poor man, what a thing to wear. Because I think he put that on and thought, right, so that's the underneath bit. Now when does the big sort of other rest of it? And no, that's it. You have to walk around that like that in front of people.
I felt sorry for him, and he had to get stitched into it and all that. He was so uncomfortable.
It was so tight that I think the zip went on one of the filming, and we had to sew him in it, and that man almost needed a catheter. Bless him.
And you think that he would have done a Chris? If he knew he had to work in that suit, he would have got down the bloody gym, wouldn't you? He would have done a Chris, because he just looked like some middle-aged bloke in a green lycra suit.
The image of supported by the voice wasn't quite as spectacular as we'd hoped.
And he was very, you know, he had this amazing voice, and we kind of felt that, you know, we had to be good around this guy, even though he was in a funny green suit and a funny mask. But you still had to give him the respect because he sounded so good.
I think he did very well to act through it and to keep that very mellow kind of mood that he gave Legion. I thought that was a good job.
I wanted an anonymous face And so his mask is very much like a Buddha, like a sort of Japanese, Chinese Buddha, with the barest features. And the one that when I drew this character, it had lots of veins and tendrils going around him, and it was supposed to have all this liquid sort of going round. We couldn't afford that.
Now look what you made me do.
We had to put on that lycra head thing and then shoot everybody in it, and then just use a quarter of our face.
The kind of head was locked in a clamp, and then you had his mask over the top of it. I mean, it's fairly brief, but it was, it again pushed the limits of discomfort into a newfound dimension.
It was a very weird-looking creature. The four of us together must be a nightmare, because we look sick.
Now it would be lovely to do it again and track it and create a CG face and everything that's available to us now, but in that interim few years, it just wasn't there. The fan effect, actually, we shot twice. We did do it once at Bankside, suspending the actors and turning the camera on its side. So we'd have them elongated, and it looked like they were hanging. So we then did it on the real perspective with a big fan.
That was good fun, that, because we just kind of just dived onto camera and grabbed hold of things and all that. But the cat topped it with that roll at the end. It was wicked.
I was actually doing those rolls myself with the fan guy and say, all the stuff. It actually looked more impressive than I thought it would. I thought it was just going to look pony.
We want your sorry ass out of here. You got 1 hour.
I've had so many fantasies come true in this, working on this show, to get to do a Western, even a comedy Western.
We wanted to write a Western, but obviously we couldn't contemplate writing that unless we knew that there was somewhere that we could shoot that would look like a Western town. So we said we'd written a Western script and got them to run off and look for various Western locations, and they found and said, hey, there's this place in Kent. There's a Western town, loads of people go there at the weekends and are cowboys, and they eat beans and don't wear watches and do everything in the old Western way.
It was our big chance to sort of ride into town and do all the cliches, beat people up in a saloon and all that stuff.
Marvellous.
We went there to check it out, and we must have been pretty behind with the scripts even then, because people were going, so talk us through the script. And Rob was going, yeah, go on, Doug, talk them through the script. And we both knew there was no script. And I was going, oh, well, there's this big gunfight in the street, and they're all sort of like all the Red Dwarf guys at this end, and then the bad guys at the other end. And then, so there's that kind of big scene, and people were writing notes. And then Rob would go, tell them the other scene. And I go, oh, yeah, the other scene. Well, yeah, and then out of this, and then they were walking, and he was just constantly winding up. And the other scene, the scene after the saloon scene, tell them about that. So we did that, and we seemed to get away with that. It was clear that we could, it was a great location, we could do everything we wanted, and then we went off and we wrote the script.
It was wicked. It was wicked.
Long been a Westerns fan, really, so the chance to get into this one was terrific.
It was your whole Western cowboy childhood fantasy.
One of the joys of doing Red Dwarf, from an effects point of view, is that it's got everything that you'd get with a science fiction, and it's got everything that you'd get with a comedy. And in this one, on top of that, it gets everything that you'd want from a Western.
And I got to ride a horse.
That's the joy of Red Dwarf, really. You can do anything. They can create anything within that world.
All I remember is I don't think the caterers turned up on time. That was what I remember, this crowd of people dressed in Western clothing standing in a muddy field going, this isn't good enough.
I assumed there'd be some sort of cardboard, cowboy town that we'd sort of vaguely, and there'd be one horse. and a couple of extras dressed vaguely as cowboys. I didn't think we'd actually go to a cowboy town where there were cowboys, and you're going, we're in the middle of Kent.
It's the in Kent bit that always makes me laugh.
It's English mud, isn't it? Very English mud and English grass. It's not Midwestern dust.
But, you know, I think once you add a bit of music and, you know, get a bit of, you know, barroom, jingle jangle, piano, whatever it is, going, it sort of looked the part.
They gave us a very authentic look, and they got their own costumes, they got everything. And, you know, for a TV show to have that production value was very lucky. They were very enthusiastic, unlike normal essays who you have to try and work into a frenzy. These guys were already in a frenzy.
We were wondering about acoustics, and I asked whether they fired their guns actually in the buildings.
One of them lifted his gun up and shot it in the air next to the producer's head.
About 2 inches away from my ear, which made me jump horribly. I think everyone thought that it was very funny. As I say, it gave me an ear infection, and I think that may have been the reason I missed the first day of filming.
Riding the horses, that was the only problem for me.
You know, there's not a thing you expect to do on Red Dwarf is ride horses, and that was that peculiar thing that, out of all the skills that I don't have, I can ride horses. I grew up riding horses, so I can actually ride a horse quite well. But I also know that they're quite dangerous. And Danny knows Danny's ridden before. He knows they can be quite dangerous. Craig and Chris had never, I think, even sat on a horse. Certainly Craig had never even sat on one. But it obviously has no fear, and it's a prop, you know, so we're all worried that this horse is going to break somehow.
Chris was really nervous of horses, right? And Chris was right in front of me. My horse was there, Chris's was there. And me and Chris really fell out about this, because I went bang and hit his horse's arse, and his horse went whoa. Kind of enough.
He goes yahoo, and it sort of slaps the horse, and they all fly off, including mine. And I'm just, there's no brake, you know, I'm looking for the sort of brake, you know, can't find one.
And Chris is shitting himself, and he went, oh, I've never seen him so angry. He went ballistic.
Once the two of them ran, the other ones went, oh, right, oh, it's the running scene. We better run.
I've got no fear of those things like that. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not a great horse rider, but, you know, Danny's a great horseman. Robert just poodle along, but Chris, really nervous. And me, absolutely no fear whatsoever, being very, very dangerous.
There's a very, very short shot, I think, where we all ride in I think in the title sequence. And then there's one shot of the three of them trotting in for a few seconds. But there was 2.5 hours of us going round and round the field.
We shot everything at Laredo in a day.
It was a director's nightmare, I should think.
I'd storyboard it all anyway, especially for effect shots, so that everybody knew what we were trying to achieve on each frame and what was being put in afterwards. And it just, as a language, makes everything clearer.
I never thought we'd get it done, and I remember it getting dark as well, and that was all a bit of a worry. I think Andy did a fantastic job, because the pressure was on him.
And I think we only had like 3 camera positions for the day, and we shot out of sequence, a shot that way, a shot that way, all from one position, moved the camera. So it was a sort of military operation, while still trying to retain the art and comedy in there.
Janet Street Porter was then the big BBC liaison person on the series. And I don't quite understand what the BBC liaison person did, because he never really came down and didn't really partake or were really involved in the show. But I think Charles Armitage, who was Noel Gay, who worked for Noel Gay at that point, had to liaise with her in some kind of everything's going okay kind of way. So he went to see her, and she said, I've just read this, I'll cut out all the swearing, I've just read this Gunmen's script. It's absolutely stupid, it's totally impossible to shoot, and tell those guys they've got to bin this and start a whole new show. And Charles was able to say, sorry, I'm not able to do that because we shot it yesterday, which still is one of his favourite stories.
This sounds like one for the Riviera Kid.
None of that was actually in the script, that the Riviera was meant to be like that. I actually said to Doug, if the cat's going to be a cowboy, he's got to be the Mexican. Because they're the only ones flamboyant enough to actually, whereas the cat could actually get away with looking like the cat. You know, I mean, you had the big dark stranger that walks into town he'd be in black leather, but it's not the same as the Mexican with the hats and the girls and
I thought Danny was great in that episode, the Riviera Kid. All this he's so camp, that lad, you know what I mean? It just plays to his campness, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean?
We'd got a whole load of hire stuff, and we had this sort of Mexican thing turn up. And when it turned up, when we were loading the truck, you know, I got this thing out, and it was just hideous. It was so bad. And I went, oh my God, we can't put him in that. And we made a phone call, and this guy who I think we were hiring stuff from said, look, I've got another Mexican uniform or something, but it's so tiny, you know, it was made for so-and-so, I don't know if it'll ever fit, you know, but, you know, I'll bring it. And we're racking our brains trying to make stuff out of thin air, cutting up curtains, you know. And the morning of the shoot, this Mexican suit turned up with the white embroidery and all that sort of stuff. And we put it in to his trailer, and he put it on, he came out, and it's the best thing that's ever fitted him. It was just fantastic.
I actually wanted, every time he did the Riviera Kid, that he'd go, the Riviera Kid, and then the guitar would fly in and he'd catch it, dun 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 dun, whoom, you know, and that's what I really wanted to do, and I forgot to ask Doug.
They call me
I think I could have got away with that.
the Riviera Kid.
James Davis made up a rig which Danny could hold between the palms of his hands that the guns would spin on. So it just looked as though he could do the spin, though actually Danny was pretty good at spinning the guns himself, truth be told.
I'm twirling these real Colt 45s that weigh in excess, I don't know, between a bag of sugar on each finger, you know, and that's how heavy they were. And all of that stuff murdered me because I was practicing it all the time, because the cat could not be, you know, looking in any way that he doesn't know how to use these guns. And it came from, you know, Sammy Davis Jr. used to do it in his act. And there's a great TV show where Sammy Davis does all this stuff, and he's singing da 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 dum, and he's doing his tricks, and then he audience, and he goes, well, I wouldn't wear them if I couldn't use them. And I had that in mind when I couldn't, you know, not, if I'm going to wear them, I got to be able to use them.
The name's Brett Riverboat. Knife Man. I was the knife man. I wanted to be the gunman. Do you know what I mean? I think I got the worst character again there. Knife man. Who wants to be a knife man? You want to be a gunslinger, don't you?
I've only been drunk once, and when I was a teenager, and I'm really bad at drinking, so, although I occasionally try. So it was observational acting. I've watched other people be drunk. So I did very bad drunk. But I thought it was fair enough for Crichton to be quite a bad drunk.
It was Rocky who came up with this cracking idea that the simulant spacecraft would have the design of one of those cow skulls that you always see perched in the foreground in the desert of all cowboy films.
A lot of those things were integrated very well, from colour schemes to shapes and patterns and styles.
It's a really, really good bit of design work, and it ties up really nicely with what we did in the cowboy environment. It's just a shame in some ways that we didn't flag that up a little bit more obviously by having one of those cow skulls maybe in the sand out at Laredo.
I am Tarka Doll, an ambassador of the great Vindelian Empire.
That was a wonderful, I loved that gag. I just thought that was inspired, because it was so stupid.
It was great. Like, it was all names from an Indian menu. You know, Bindi Bhaji and Tarka Dal and all this kind of stuff.
And I thought they looked really good. I thought you could do a whole series.
The audience laughed just from seeing the cat's mouth upside down with the teeth going upwards. I mean, it just looked it did look like an alien.
They wouldn't stick. So every time we come back up, the eyeball would come off.
Craig and Danny had to hand back glass eyeballs to me behind themselves, so they couldn't see me. And I was having to do that sort of bad, no eyeballs acting. And we never found them. They'd hand them to me and they'd drop them, and, you know, there was quite a few retakes on that.
The film noir opening was just done at the back of the studio. I think we did put some trays of water down and bounce some lights into that to pretend we were at the harbour or something, and we hired a car. I think that was our only expense.
Rock the car.
Well, Craig Charles managed that himself, actually, in the car. I think from his experience, he knew how a car would move. Craig never wanted to go half measures.
The lava was made out of the same substance that was used as gunge in shows like Noel's House Party, and effectively it's an industrial food thickener. It's if I can product place, it's the powder that you get in stuff like cuppa soup and pot noodle, and when you add boiling water to it, it becomes gelatinous.
Just to scale that, to not feel you've got a bucket of slop and you're pulling a model out of it, is very hard.
The bug actually never enters the fake lava. It goes through a slot in the set, but James Davis had rigged up a small gas explosion, so at the point that the starbug vanishes from view, this great gout of flame comes up, and you completely buy the fact that it's gone straight into the lava.
By the stage it went up for the Emmys, we'd kind of forgotten about it, really. We'd gone down very well in this country, and it was a period of time afterwards. And I was on another job and got the call that we were up for an Emmy, and then a call fairly soon after that we'd won it. So it was very exciting, yeah.
One always hopes on any show that you work on that there's an award in it somewhere, but the Emmy is probably the biggest award in TV, and so we were thrilled to get it.
Well deserved for Rob and Doug, though. It was a strong series, and that was probably their strongest script within that.
I was in the edit, so I wasn't able to go to that. Rob went with Robert, and I said to Robert, if we win, you must phone me. I'll have my mobile by my bed, it doesn't matter what time, phone me. And he goes, absolutely, of course I will. Went to bed, phone by the side of my bed, woke up in the morning, no message, nothing. I just thought, oh well. So I thought, I wonder who has one. So I turned on the TV, went to teletext, and there it was. We'd won. And that's how I found out. It was so extraordinary. And Robert got invited to some showbiz party and forgot or something. Bastard.
Rob and Doug came up to myself, Paul McGuinness and Peter Ragg and asked if the polymorph still existed from Series 3. Now it did, but inevitably with these things it's been covered in slime and stuck in a cupboard for 4 years. It had rotted, it was not in a good state.
I didn't want it to look like an excuse for bringing Dwayne back, and I think we got away with it.
What's it turned me into?
I mean, Dwayne Dibley would have been a brilliant spin-off series. You know, The Life and Times of Dwayne Dibley.
It was a real crowd pleaser, both those characters and the polymorph itself. Worked very well in previous series, so it was obvious that Rob and Doug thought they could mine that comedy seam one more time.
When these characters come back, the audience go through the roof. You know, it's like one of those American sitcoms, you know, where you enter the set and a round of applause for 5 minutes and you've got to stand there like that before you say your line, you know.
Carol, man. Looks like we both bought a bite from the little blighter.
You couldn't get more ridiculously opposite characters, and it was great to do the, come on, let's go join the party, Dwayne-y boy. You know, he was sort of helping Dwayne through his sadness, you know.
Before we leave, I just gotta change these clothes. If I don't get into some sideways iron flares and transparent plastic sandals, I swear I'll go crazy.
Do what you have to, old chum. I'll go tell him we're having a party.
I was happy to bring Ace Rimmer back if I could get hold of the wig that we had in Series 4, which we didn't. So I had to get on and play Ace with a thatch parked on top of my head that wasn't nearly of the same class and variety of the Series 4, which I gather, to open up a bit of intrigue, may have been stolen from one of the cupboards, the wig stores.
I didn't really expect the response, though. I mean, when Dwayne Dibley first appeared from below the counter, I mean, we just sat around for about 10 minutes while the audience howled and cheered and clapped, and calm down, and then we had to do it again. I always questioned how that would play at home to an audience, who didn't know, so we kept reshooting it to get it to be a normal hey and on. I think, as I remember, a lot of the difficulty was finding people who would fit in his costumes, and we knew we wanted a big man to marry Lister, or a big Gelf to marry Lister.
So I got a call Monday evening. Are you free to work on Red Dwarf starting tomorrow? Yes. Studios at 10 o'clock, and that was basically it.
He loved Craig. I think he genuinely loved Craig. I think so. He was there in the part, and he was a large gentleman, but really sweet man, very nice guy.
The snogging in the village at the wedding caused a lot of laughter, because it was Craig getting the kissing all the time, from me, which was really quite horny.
I think he liked me, I can't fight anymore. Come on.
Even in rehearsal, it became quite method, and he was freaking Craig out quite a lot, actually, coming onto him. Big, bearded, large man. It was great.
He was not into the kissing at all, I'm afraid to say. There were no tongues. Which is a shame, because I think she would have liked that.
He was getting right into the scene.
When he threw Craig over his shoulder, it really was like me throwing a pillowcase over mine. I mean, it was no strain to him, because I was sort of going, that's quite hard. He's got to chuck Craig over his shoulder and get out. And I just sort of, whip, over he goes, dum, dum, dum. Craig's like...
In his costume and all that, he was better than some of the women I've pulled after a couple of pair-nos.
We were lucky with the Guelph village, because there was a standing village on the back lot at Shepperton that had come from some Hollywood TV miniseries.
Yeah, it was Covington Cross, I think. I don't know. All I remember is walking around the site looking for something else we can film on, and that was another one where we went through the car park and then said, oh, look, there's these funny mud huts and a bit of a castle. What can we do with that?
I just loved the Leggett scene out of that. Change your plan, Leggett! I was like that then. You're not making me do that again.
Always with those night shoots, you look at the sort of wrap time, sort of 2:30 in the morning. By 2:30 in the morning, we'd lit some of the torches in the village. I don't think we'd actually shot anything by then.
It was a very long, cold night, and surprisingly, rubber latex bodies are not warm. It was freezing. So at one point, there's the Guelphs all sitting there huddled up in cloaks, trying to keep warm.
I remember the other thing that the caterers came out with hot chocolate and brandy at one point, which kept us going through the night. I remember that was very useful.
That was another hysterical night shoot with the mistaken, give them a tot of whiskey to keep them going. Oh no, Robert's had some. Don't let him have any more. Give him some pizza. And that, because normally I would never eat with the mask on, but I remember that night it was like, oh, I'll have a bit of pizza. And there was like, huge amount. I can't tell where it's going. You just sort of aim it vaguely at your mouth. So there were sort of lumps of ham and pineapple hanging off Crichton's face, much to the makeup department's delight.
And there was a lot of improvisation as well that night. I seem to recall the funny handshake business was all made up on the night. It wasn't scripted. That was basically down to Robert.
Stupid handshake. With Ainsley Herriot, who was brilliant, very funny. And I thought did brilliant Guelph talk.
It was great having him on board, you know what I mean? Because he was in the Calypso Twins before that. You know what I mean? A sort of kind of comedy duo who sang funny songs. And Ainsley danced and played maracas. So that's how I'd met him beforehand. And then all of a sudden he's a TV chef. That must have been a quick course.
They're gone in. Okay. They started with the face, which took about 4 hours in makeup, sticking on the rubber face, the hair, the beard, the warts.
Andrea I think she'd found or got hold of a load of sort of pig snuffle noses from the floor of some film set that she was working on. So she had all these bits that sort of got stuck.
Once that was on, it was nothing but cups of tea through a straw.
We had these mad acrylic wigs, and we had this sort of raffia, furry stuff all over these bodysuits.
Just sitting in the makeup room with the other guys all being made up at the same time, there's not a lot you can do except sit and chat and laugh and, and discuss Ainsley's recipe for curried goat, which he did keep telling us about a lot.
The VisFX boys moulded these breast, stomach pads.
Huge, great, smelly thing, which weighed a ton.
These costumes were spray painted with car spray paint. They were covered in the most flammable, this and that. I mean, they were, you know, cheaply made, put together, acrylic. And we were in the studio, and suddenly they did this scene where they sat round a campfire with real flames. I stood with Jill, my assistant, and 2 fire extinguishers, because I was absolutely determined Ainsley Harriott would go up in a ball of fire.
It was quite difficult to actually get the Guelph speak as it was written.
No, the absurdity of that was we were speaking completely, you know, mythical Guelph talk, and Rob and Doug had actually typed out.
We were told to stick to the script.
And then you go, how do I say that? It's sort of triple A-C-H-H-H-H-H.
One had to speak each ah specifically.
Bobby did too many achs. It's
We've lost it. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong panel.
I mean, we've done lots of explosions. Peter Ragg and his special effects team love to blow things up, particularly if we're in the way. And that was what they used then was a pressurised air tank. And normally they're like a kind of camping gas bottle. They're that sort of scale. This one was sort of the one you move on the back of a truck. It was just huge. It took like 4 people to wheel it into the studio. This compressor was going for sort of 2.5 hours while they were building it up. And it has a huge funnel on the front that was full of dust, cork, bits of cork, and little shards of kind of cut up plastic sheet, you know, little transparent plastic sheet, to make it to kind of catch the light, so it looked like glass and dust.
Peter Ragg, the legendary Peter Ragg, had set up this explosion. You know, there was going to be, you know, 2 big explosions, and the ones at the front were going to go. So on, okay, 1, 2, 3, the one at the front's going to go, so you're going to turn that way. And then, boom, the one at the back, and you turn that way.
It was sort of pointed at my back, and Danny was kind of over that side, so it didn't hit the cameras, because obviously the cameras are valuable. You don't want to damage them. Doesn't matter about the actors. So then we were all ready for this, and it was... So there were quite big sparks going up.
So we turned around, and it blew up from the back. And then all you saw was debris coming at us at 400 miles an hour.
I just flew forward. I didn't even hear the thing go off. I was flying over the table, and I saw Dan kind of reel away, and it really whacked us. I mean, it was the equivalent of a sort of shockwave from an explosion. There was no... I didn't push myself out of my chair at all. I was thrown across the table.
The back of Robert's skull was... There was cork embedded all in the mask, all at the back of his head, because he didn't turn around.
I felt one lump, then someone else went, bloody hell, they were kind of ripping tons of bits of cork, so it had buried itself in the foam. So that had protected me, and my costume had. Danny got it right in the side of the face, and he had some bruising.
A welt came up under my eye, and we were in the middle of filming.
I got it in the back, but Danny had his face to the side, and it just went poof, and his face looked like, you know, that wood chip wallpaper.
The welt's in his face. The audience just went quiet. They literally thought someone had their head blown off. I mean, literally, it was like...
Peter Ragg, God bless him. I mean, a lovely bloke, you know, and he was devastated by it, you know.
And you know, the sort of ambulance guys came down, and luckily it was just a little bit of a swelling. It wasn't serious, but Peter Ragg was just, you couldn't console him. He was just devastated.
In just 6 days, I had created my own world, lush and verdant. I had created Rimmer World.
He was such a sort of likeably dislikable character. I think, yeah, it was good fun to examine him more.
When I watched it during the commentary, I thought, oh, there's a lot of me here.
Hundreds and hundreds of Chris Barrys.
Goodness me, they gave me a lot to do that day. But it was all, you know, sort of Rimmer 1 and Rimmer 2 as guards and stuff. So, again, it was a bit of a nightmare logistically to shoot it.
What's the eye line? Sort of up there, yeah?
Yeah, it's where John is, really. And it's such a great idea, the idea that he'd been there for hundreds of years, having slipped through the wormhole or black hole, whichever it was. I seem to remember a naked man standing in the forest in front of Chris, which was very funny.
Yes, my naked stunt double, who I probably got slightly spottier back than he did, but then I'm not a naked stunt double person, am I? So yeah, I think he. Yeah, I'll go with him. I think he was all right.
I think he was quite well represented, yes.
All the woodland sequences were shot on the back lot at Shepperton.
We were out there quite a lot. It was cheap, you see. I don't think we had to pay anything for it, so that was probably why.
I don't know what it is, why it is just the fate of sitcom production, I guess, that you don't shoot them in sort of June, July, August. You shoot them in kind of February, March, April. So we were outside in what was supposed to be this beautiful, idyllic kind of Garden of Eden, and Chris in a toga. And bitterly cold. It was really brutally cold that day. And that was one of the advantages of Crichton. It was, you know, occasionally it would come into its own, that costume, because I wasn't cold. I wasn't even chilly. I was absolutely fine. Everybody else had big coats on until we were shooting, and I was just there. I was about the right temperature. I needed it to be about -10 with a wind chill factor of -14. Then I'm comfy. I was really happy. And it was annoying a lot of people. Isn't it lovely? Doesn't it look great? Shut up, Bobby, I'm freezing.
Avert your eyes from her great beauty.
I thought that was quite worrying, seeing Chris kiss himself. I found that mildly disturbing. I don't quite know what it does on a sort of... I worry what the influence that will have on children.
I seem to remember that there were some twins, girls, 2 girls at the time.
Yeah, they were like sort of harem outfits.
And then they changed it. But yes, that was an enjoyable kiss, that one.
Actually, as far as psychotic, deranged, ruthless killer simulants go, you're a bit of a babe. What are you doing tonight?
Die. Care to join me?
I get to try and chat her up, but she doesn't want to know. She wants to kill me. It's the story of my life. The story of my life. There's no acting there, you know.
The pus-sucking, puke-laden, walking cesspits of unspeakableness.
She had a lovely voice. It was like she'd had a bottle of whiskey and 7 cigars. It was really deep, but it was very husky. I found that peculiarly attractive.
There's one thing you should know. Last time we met, I was wearing a cute little black number with peach trim and gold spangles. And although it looks like I'm wearing the same outfit today, it is, in fact, an entirely different cute little black number with completely different gold spangles.
I think they were siphoning money off of my costume budget for Peter Ragg's special effects. I reckon he had more of a smile later on, I think, Pete, because he knew he was getting my costume money, I think.
This is something that Paul McGuinness wanted to try. Every explosion we'd done in Red Dwarf from the beginning had been of a similar style. It's either white or orange and fiery, and it would be really nice if this was an alien ship and could explode in a slightly more alien way. So he experimented with all sorts of different powders and colours and managed to get green and blue and yellow explosions in there as well. And again, it's an amazingly visual piece and very different from anything else we'd done. The clog, as it was termed in the end, was the orange escape pod from Rimworld. It was quite a heavy piece of kit. Now, to get the shot of it racing away from camera and spinning as it went, we actually elected to shoot this with a camera on the ground pointing vertically up and the model being pulled up to the ceiling and doing about 30 foot of travel, I suppose, up to the blue screen in the ceiling. And on the 3rd or 4th take of this, Pete Tyler, who's crouched on the floor with his eye to the eyepiece of the camera watching this, suddenly noticed that having hit the blue screen, it seemed to be travelling back towards him rather faster than it should be. And he ducked out the way, and the line had broke, and the clog dropped 30 foot and just missed the camera. It actually clouts the matte box of the camera on the way down in the spot where Pete's head had been about a second and a half earlier.
I'm so thick. When he had the grinding balls, I'd forgotten how big they were the first time. Of course, the audience get that straight away, because I just see him, oh, he's still got the balls. Oh, yeah, they are smaller. Sorry, comedy king. But that was that wonderful moment. I think that was a little present from Rob and Doug. I've always thought of that, is that there was that really long speech that Craig does, that Lister has to do about, I know what, we get the guards, we get the swords, and we cut this, and we get some string.
Why don't we scrape away this mortar here, slide one of these bricks out, then using rope weave from strands of this hessian, rig up a kind of pulley system. So that when a guard comes in, he sets up a tripwire, gets laid out, and we put Rimmer in the guard's uniform, he leads us out, we steal some swords, and fight our way back to the bug.
Or we could use the teleporter.
And I got the little line at the end, which it's always been the other way around up to that point. But at that point, that was like a birthday. It was a special treat.
Rimmer World was weeks ago. We're far more concerned at the moment about the quite hideous thing that's happened to Lister.
There was a lot of debate about that ending, really, because if you're with the character that visited the future and then went away, Rimmer suggesting that something had happened to Lister could be a wind-up, just to leave him with that, oh no, no, and then he's disappeared, which is quite a nice cliffhanger on that character. And we did shoot the scene with Lister coming back out of the toilet. What's up, lads? You know, so we knew it was a wind-up. But it went backwards and forwards a few times, and I think in the end, not explaining that nothing had happened to Lister was too plonky, really.
Opening comms. Present Starbug calling future Starbug. We are ready to communicate.
Yes, there wasn't a huge amount of script for that one, which was very unusual. It's the only time it's ever happened.
You do think all of the scariest things that could possibly happen.
Originally, there had been an inquiry from Rob and Doug. What would be the feasibility of a 3-foot-high robot that could walk with Lister's brain on the top of it, which we all just laughed. And they went away very quickly saying, OK, we'll write something different.
I don't remember the exact order, but I remember receiving part of a script on the Monday morning and blocking that and then probably sending the actors home early because there was nothing else to rehearse.
We didn't know what to do, and I actually remember going home and going, like, sitting in my kitchen going, but not happy. You know, you should be really happy. I don't have to learn my lines. So it was going, what are we going to do? You know, because we knew we were shooting it in 2 days' time. Had nothing to learn, I desperately need as much time as I can get to get those lines in.
We were desperate for the script, and it was all coming close to the wire now.
We often used to start rehearsals and think that Mel probably knew more than anyone what was going to happen because they did used to tell him what sets he had to make in advance. So we used to go to Mel quite a lot and say, what's happening in that episode? Because he always had a bit of the knowledge before we did.
There was no time to cast it. There was no time to build new sets. There was no time to go and film anywhere else. And we didn't, in fact, get the final draft of the script until the Wednesday, which was the day before the pre-record. So it was really tight.
It's interesting dilemma when you're in a late script situation. In many ways, you have to hold your nerve. You have to take a long-term view of what the show's going to be like rather than how much people are hating you at this precise second. Because in the end, everything is forgotten but the show. And so if you hand in a lousy script and everyone's got oodles of time to rehearse it, the only thing that will be remembered is the show's lousy. If you hand in a show and it's really, really late, but ultimately that show's pretty good or even better than pretty good, then that's fine. And, OK, the cast will remember, you know, because it was a bit nail-biting for them.
It was the last show and, whoa, you know, maybe it's that last show ever, you know, all that stuff starts coming through again, and then it's like, then the cast sort of, I don't know,
I can't really explain why the show was late. There are always good reasons, not because we weren't doing any work. It wasn't anything to do with that. It's generally, when we're late with the script, it's because we're constantly rejecting ideas which we don't feel are good enough. Because there's nothing that really inflames our imagination, and we're holding out for something terrific, and that doesn't always come along, but then it's only when you go, guys, you've got to write something now. You have to give up on those dreams of being able to write something, you know, great. So we've been in situations like this before, and Rob, I have to say, was terrific at holding his nerve. I mean, way past the bounds of any normal sane person. And the best example is that radio show where he doggedly refused to accept any ideas until 3 a.m. of the day we were recording the radio show. And he just kept going, no, we can think of something better. No. And it was 3 o'clock before he finally went, OK, let's do that one. And again, that show was that worked out OK too. But boy, God dear, it's not good on your bottom. It really isn't.
But on the day when we shot it in front of the audience, that huge long sequence was done on auto cues, which we never had. Hundreds of little screens buried all over the set. So I had one there in front of me, one down here, one over here, one behind Chris's head, one behind Craig's head, one behind Danny's head. Danny had two down there. You know, we all had them. Even Craig had to read an auto cue. Even he couldn't learn lines that fast.
If you're having new scenes coming in on the day of recording in front of an audience, you don't have any choice.
I personally was just worried about the audience seeing us using auto cue. I think that, you know, that would have affected maybe the audiences. Maybe they felt they were being cheated, and they wouldn't laugh. You know, you got an audience sitting there waiting to be entertained. It wasn't very comfortable thinking, my God, someone's going to shout out, they've got 7 auto cues there.
Hancock, when he did The Blood Donor, which is probably the most famous show he ever did, was all done on what they call cue cards, idiot boards, whatever. And that had been done in, 60s. So we knew it was possible. And there are all sorts of, you know, technology now, there are all sorts of monitors where dialogue could be hidden. And also a lot of Robert's long speeches in previous shows had been written and the board's held up and Robert's doing da-da-da-da. So Robert is a seasoned pro at reading his lines off boards. The others, not so much.
In the cockpit of Starbug, you know, conveniently placed, you know, instead of seeing a planet coming towards us, we were seeing our lines go, but boy, did we make it look as if we had a planet coming towards us. That's what I would say. So there's a skill in that as well.
While we were shooting, there was one sequence I still remember very clearly where we'd done a bit and there was a big laugh and it was working and we go, and we're all really nervous going, can you make it go up a bit so you can see the next bit so you know what's coming? And then I looked at my screen and the words of a speech I was doing suddenly disappeared. And they disappear in a really odd way on an auto cue. They go like that. And then new words appearing. And then I looked over and I could see Doug on the auto cue. He wrote the script on the auto cue with Rob there going, yeah, no, but no. And then they went, right, and action. Well, sir, it looks like the dynamic of this...
It's a defense device fitted to Space Corps test ships, which are fitted with prototype drives so awesome in their power, they have to be safeguarded at all costs.
We got through that show. We recorded that show in record time. And there was a lot of discussion after that was, forget rehearsals. Put him in costume, put him in front of an audience, give him the auto cues, that's it. We'll get it done. We could record the whole series in a couple of weeks.
When I watched the show, I cannot see anyone reading an auto cue. I think it was a genius way out, and that's what you need when you're in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it. I think you can see it. And we were all saying, I don't think you could tell. You know, you couldn't tell that I was going like that all the way through the scene. You know, I'm talking to Chris here and I'm actually looking over there. You know, it's just, yeah, you can sort of see.
All right, then why does it look more realistically human?
Humans have always found exact duplicates rather disturbing, sir. The 3000 series was notoriously unpopular.
Half the script went in. Then we got the message back that Craig didn't think it was funny. And so we then killed him in the show. Just because we we thought we really need some support and love here, okay? We don't need this half of the script isn't funny, because actually it was funny.
They were winding me up. It was like R.I.P. Dave Lister. They were going to call it that. It was going to be like, you know, that's the...
And it worked out okay in the end. I mean, and for the most part, you really can't tell the reading. I genuinely don't believe you can tell. Okay, the defence rests.
When the old crew arrived, the mature Red Dwarf crew, probably, I think we could redo that now without any makeup.
Did we actually used to live like this? What a god-awful, depressing little hole.
That was actually quite tricky to know where to pitch that because, you know, how much was he going to be like, you know, the Rimmer, the sort of young-ish Rimmer. And, you know, it's quite difficult to know, you know, where with a voice and how you carry yourself and everything, just how well you're going to age.
We had old fat Gimmer Rimmer with his big stomach, literally just a change of colour. He was that rather sort of bile yellow, if I remember rightly. Danny, we used the tartan suit that we'd had in Series 3, I remember, with a Bobby Charlton sweep over. It was very good. But it really was utilising everything that we had at the last minute.
I actually think Crichton's wig was rather good. I thought it was real.
It was quite a tricky thing to do that, but trickier than it kind of looked. It wasn't just plonking a grey wig on and a moustache.
But it was great seeing the way Danny in the bald wig, you know, and Rimmer. It was great seeing them. Because in 10 years' time, that's the way those guys will look, you know.
But it was great fun to be able to extrapolate out those characters and say, what would they be like in their worst success in, 30 years' time. It was great fun.
Craig's genuine reaction to the fact that he was only a brain in a jar was great. I mean, the actor's reaction as opposed to the characters. It was very similar to the character's reaction. How come I'm a brain in a jar?
I was just a head in a jar. I said, well, no, just a brain in a jar. I said, well, can't I at least be a head? And he went, no, just a brain. I said, well, you could just, like, cut a sort of hole in the bottom of the jar, and I could put my head through, and I could be a head. At least you could see me.
Jill, my assistant, had a friend from art school who'd left and blah, 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 and I magnanimously said, oh, we'll make the brain, it's fine. And it's the worst thing I should have kept my mouth shut. We had this guy who made it, and it was fine. But it was in a big glass jar, it had all this liquid, it had to glow, it had to, it was a major piece of BBC technology, and we'd made it out of sticky back plastic.
The end of the show had been greatly debated, both at the shooting stage and in the edits. And I think the fans knew an ending, and that may have spurred part of the decision-making process of not being second-guessed.
That ending sequence for that episode, for that series, was, I found, when I look at it now, it's actually quite moving and dramatic. I mean, they were the biggest explosions we'd ever done, because it was the end of the series, so we could really blow the set to bits. Normally when there's an explosion and the cat's got blood on his trousers and doesn't match the colour of his, he's dead. It's actually finished. They're all dead, and then Crichton dies as well, and Rimmer has to try and save everything. And that's in the original one. He obviously does save us, and we're all having we go back in time long enough to be alive, and we all drink lovely cocktails, which are actually made out of urine recycle, which is why we got the little foam moustaches.
To the present.
To the present.
They aren't margaritas. That's urine recycle.
And that's how we thought it was ending. I must admit, when we finished filming it, that's the bit we filmed as the ending. So it was quite spooky when it went out without that scene in.
We just looked at that in the edit, and I just felt it was kind of too pat and just so what, and kind of too neat. And I thought, oh well, there's an opportunity here of ending on a cliffhanger if we just go back a bit.
Yes, on the one occasion where I make a Toys R Us gun painted grey look convincingly heavy and dangerous, it goes and gets cut. Sod's law, eh?
Blowing up the ship at the end it still had a duplicitousness, could be the old characters, could be the new characters, and not going into a sort of very pat explanation. So here we are, and we'll carry on next time. And, may have twisted the odd broadcaster's arm for another series and so on through. It was a bit naughty and a bit mean, but we enjoyed it, yeah.